My Gavanen Melanine, and well met indeed. I am Arachia Galadirthan, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome to the first of the version 2 faction overviews. And we start with the Dwarves of Erebor and the Iron Hills, or to be more precise now, they are simply known as the Dwarves of Erebor. The older faction overviews can be found linked in the description below if you wish to go back and see how much has changed for this particular faction, the Dwarves. I will follow exactly the same pattern that every faction overview on my channel has followed since the first ones over 2 years ago. So, to begin with, the size of your domain and your initial army. Well, the Dwarves of Erebor begin with but 2 provinces, Cirric Cathol in the Iron Hills itself, and the city of Erebor, as you can see there. In terms of starting armies, your armies are relatively small. Over in Cirric Cathol, if we start there, you've only got Lord Thorin, your factionaire, with a unit of Erebor Infantry. Up at your capital city, King Dane stands proud as the city's leader. He has 2 units of Dwarven labourers and 1 unit of Erebor Infantry. Gloin has an Erebor Infantry and 2 more Dwarven labourers, and Gimli has nothing but himself. So in terms of troops, very, very small, and in terms of domain, relatively small. Now, whilst your domain is quite small, the size of the provinces you hold are not that small. So that comes into play a little while later when we deal with wealth. So, Section 2, Leader and Capital. Your capital is, of course, Erebor, and your leader is, of course, King Dane. And that is what the Dwarven generic leader looks like. Only Gimli has a unique model. The others look like this gentleman here. This is your standard general, and that is your standard captain. In terms of uniques then, well, of course they all are. Dane has Sons of the Fallen, representing the fact that he fought at the Battle of Azanulbizar. Is that the name? Azanulbizar. He fought at the Battle of Azanulbizar. So he has Sons of the Fallen, which is where they take their name. The culmination of the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. Gloin also has... Gloin does not. Gloin now just has the standard Dwarven Bodyguard, Royal Guard. Gimli, however, does. He has Axe Guard of Erebor, just reflecting his link to the fact that he's from Erebor, and he's a famously axe-wielding dwarf. Lord Thorin, your factionaire, residing all the way over here in Cirric Cathol, also does not have a unique, and merely has Royal Guard, as they are now known. Your diplomat comes out of Erebor itself from the Throne of Thrain, where you can recruit your diplomat. Nearest diplomats beyond that are in Thranduil's Halls and Dale itself. So you could get 3 diplomats quite quickly if you feel like backstabbing around. But that's up to yourselves. So in terms of rebel expansion, as you can see from the map, there's a couple more choices now. You can go for Bergram if you wish. You could also head over to the east to Miraron and then south through to Talathang and Skarn if you can beat Rune to them. Or you can head west through the large garrison of Witherboard or up and through to Dane's Halls through Onazanar, the small little village in the mountains here. Those are your options. Do note that this and all faction overviews will be recorded at turn 2. So all auto expansion has already taken place. So there's nothing hidden that might shock up and get you later on. So your neighbours and your diplomacy then. Well, let's start with diplomacy. That's your family tree. There's diplomacy. You are allied to the Kingdom of Dale, the Dwarves of Eredluin, and the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm. You are at war at the game's start with the Eastlings of Rune and the remnants of Angmar. Interestingly. You are not at war with the Holy Roman Empire, the Misty Mountains. And you are not at war with Mordor either. You are only at war with Rune and Angmar. So that's something just to note that will affect your diplomacy and your alliances. Also note that you're not allied to Dorwinion at game start either, as they reside down there in their own lands of Dorwinion. You obviously are being a Dwarven nation. You suffer morale negative effects, negative relations, that's the word I'm after, with basically all the orcs around you. So if you're playing the standard version of the game with no submods, you are likely to be attacked by the Misty Mountains and by the Shadow of Mirkwood, for they dislike you. You are, however, very likely to get favourable relations with Dorwinion because you're at war with someone they will soon be at war with themselves. Right, so Dwarven Economy and what structures they have. Well, Dwarves, of course, are not restricted to build anything. You can get the highest tier castles and the highest tier cities. No concerns whatsoever. In terms of guilds, you get the Masons Guild, which gives you, obviously, much cheaper building costs. And for the Dwarves, the Masons Guild gives you cheaper building costs across the world. So getting the highest tier headquarters gives you a 30% cost reduction on top of the standard Masons Guild that every nation now gets. The Master Builders, Stoneworkers, Master Stoneworkers, and Stoneworkers Guild House, which is new to version 2. So every nation now gets these, which just reduce construction costs in your cities. But on top of that, the Dwarves get the Masons Guild, which further increases the reduction. If you had a Masons Guild headquarters, giving you 70% reduction, and a Master Builder at the top at 26, you are almost getting a 100% reduction in construction costs. Now, obviously, that's an awful lot, but it's also incredibly rare. The Masons Guild is very hard to get, and the Masons Guild headquarters will almost certainly be taken by the AI long before you get a chance to get it. The Master Masons Guild you can only get in one location. So whilst all of your towns could potentially have a 46% reduction, only one town will actually benefit from that extra 30 on top of it. So that's that. You also get the Warriors Guild, which for the Dwarves is called the Axesmiths Guild, and the Durin's Forge Hall, which gives, as you can see, a melee weapon bonus, a morale bonus to any troops trained in the location of the building, and an experience bonus to troops trained all over the world for the Dwarves. This lower tier, which can be built in every town, just gives a melee weapon bonus. So no restriction for the dwarves. In terms of economy, you get one significant boost that everyone else does not get, and that is that your mines are substantially wealthier than everyone else's. This is reflected in the building income and not in the mines themselves. So the reason the mines here are giving 600 is because gold gives 300 and you have 2 gold resources. If we were to scan over to Kirigithor, which I believe only has iron, but has at least 2 of them, and we check the mines here, that one is also at 600. Because there are 3 of them. So iron gives 200 gold coins per resource, and there are 3 of them here, so you get 600. Silver gives 250, gold gives 300. So 1 gold resource is the same as 1.5 iron resources. So somewhere, for example, like Onazanar with 2 iron is actually better than a location with 1 gold. So do bear that in mind. But you get a much bigger boost from the additional income. So the Dwarves get a 250 gold boost in the first tier of mines. And if we check out the rest of the mines, it starts at 250. And it goes to 400. And then you get a substantial boost, obviously, to the gold. Almost doubling to the next tier. Dwarves getting a culture increase bonus from mines and a population bonus from mines. And then the highest tier for the Dwarves gives 550 gold. So in Erebor alone, the highest tier mining complex is giving you 2,350 gold, not including the trade you'd be getting from that. So as Dwarves, getting mines is almost an absolute must. But do bear in mind that mines are only present in the mountains. So whilst you get a huge boost from wealth in the mountains, mines are very rare around the world. There are not very many locations that even have ore resources. And to counter your significant boost to mines, you do suffer, unfortunately, in that you do not get beyond the second tier of the farm, which means your population growth and your food is lower than everyone else's. This is to reflect, mostly, from a gameplay perspective, it's to counter the Dwarves' significant mining wealth. And from a lore perspective, it's to reflect the fact that the Dwarves are a very low population peoples. There are not very many Dwarves in the world, and their population disappears as we go into the 4th age. It does not grow. And so to reflect that, we basically limit their farms to suggest that they don't have enough people to need anything larger than the second tier. So do note that. You get less on your food production, but more on your mines. Those are the major features of in terms of buildings. Just to give you an idea, to link the next 2 together, the garrison building for the Dwarves, as it is for all, is the garrison quarters. And for the Dwarves, it's called an armory, and then it's called Durin's Armory. Now, I apologise for the slightly poorer quality of the image. We have to take the images from pre-existing ones, and there's only so much that can be done. before you are just cutting bits of other buildings off and expanding them. So you get the armory to start, but it requires the pipe hall, which is your town hall building. So you must have the first building of town hall in order to get your garrison quarters. The second tier requires the miners' union, which is the third tier of the town hall. However, in a castle, do note that the garrison quarters are available immediately. In towns, they require the town hall. In castles, they require nothing. They come straight from the castle itself, which is useful. Makes more military emphasis on your castles. So in terms of scripts, then what scripts do the dwarves get? Well, you don't really get any, unfortunately. The only sort of quasi-script, if you will, is the Oricani Clan Hall. Now, the Oricani Clan Hall is merely just a building that trains Oricani units. It's unique to Erebor and possibly Khazad-dûm. It's the Arid cannot get it. You can only build it in certain locations, as it doesn't say, but and those certain locations are essentially the entire range of the Misty Mountains, right down to the Khazad-dûm, east and west. And you can also get it right on the eastern tip of Rune, to suggest that because this is the closest location to the Oricani Mountains, there's a suggestion that it's less travel for the dwarves, so you can get them there as well. The Oricani Clan Hall comes in 2 tiers, and the second tier gives you far more units, as you can see there. Stiffbeard Scouts, Stonefoot Warriors, Iron Fist Axes, Oricani Nobles, and Blacklock Engineers. The lower tier just giving the Scouts and the Warriors. This, of course, is all for version 2, and those are the only scripts for Erebor. I shall explain the Garrison Script in brief. The Garrison Script is no longer based on the... It's no longer faction-wide, and instead, in order to get a garrison in a town, you must build the garrison quarters. Unless you build this building, you will not get a garrison. The second tier just gives you better troops and more troops. So the first tier will give you a small garrison, the second tier will give you a much larger garrison, and the second tier, the units will likely be upgraded, certainly in their armour. They'll also probably have higher experience, and they'll also likely have a melee weapon upgrade as well. So in larger towns, if you really want them protected, go for the second tier of the armory. Do note that the AI can get units in most of the key settlements around the world. They can get them without building a garrison hall. So if you were playing as Mordor and you attack Minas Tirith on turn 2 by cheating an army across the river, they will get a garrison, even if they don't have a garrison hall. So that's something to note. The garrison hall, if a town has built a garrison hall and you then capture that town, the garrison hall will be destroyed and you'll have to start again. So you never now automatically get a garrison when you're playing as a human, as these nations, but the AI does sometimes. So then we come to the real big one for the faction overviews, the map changes for Erebor. Pardon that, my voice just broke. Well, of course, Anazanar is entirely new, and you will not have seen that one before. It's not there in version 1.2, so that's one of the newer ones. And of course, the biggest changes for Erebor is the entire northeastern region of Ravanian. Mirairon and Skarn are now up on these kind of hilly plateaus, which just gives a bit more variety in the battles. Talathang is now protected by more rivers and has been moved as well. It used to be up here, as you can see, and it is no longer there. It's now in the centre. There's just some rivers there acting as choke points. Gondavan is now nestled away in this hill formation which follows the line of the river around the edge. And there's a couple of impassable locations as well, which are marked by those white cliffs. Those are really the only main changes that are very, very near to Erebor. Slightly further afield, there are additions in central Ravanian. There's now a lake here, as you can see. Logarth has been added, the region of Lothaur. So Carvarad has been split up still further, and now Vilta or Midjord and Logarth and Lothaur are now present as well. So there's some changes around this sort of region. Also, there are some name changes over here. So Burmarlinge is now Gazar Uyel, Erland's Ferry for Condovan, Gazar Ibar for Winterian Ior, Gazar Barak in Talathang, and Gazar Narkad in Skarn. Logathervold is still the northeasterly region, though. So those are the most immediate map changes for Erebor, the ones that are likely to impact on your gameplay the most. Finally then, tips and difficulty as playing as Erebor in version 2. Well, much the same as every other Dwarven nation, Erebor are easily classed as an easy nation. They are classed as an easy nation, rather. A very simple faction to play as. As we'll see from the battle side, Your troops are incredibly powerful, if a little expensive, but because you get such formidable money from Erebor, if you can hold on to Erebor, it really will be a moneymaker for the rest of the game, no trouble. But if you lose it, you might be in some difficulty. But also because your enemies are so far away, it gives you a long time to build up. You don't have to attack Rune early, although it's very advisable that you do. Rune are unfortunately something of a snowball, and whilst at game start it looks like their realm is quite large, they have only actually just gained all of these regions. So they've got to build up their culture and build up the buildings a bit. So you've got a little bit of breathing space, but once they get going, they will smash Dorwinion and they'll be knocking on your door before you know where you are. And Rune can be quite annoying with the number of javelin troops that they have and horse archers, which is very difficult to counter as the dwarves. However, you do have the west relatively safe. The Misty Mountains rarely come through Witherboard, and they often take Anazanar, but then they don't come down out of the Withered Heath to Erebor. Also, they tend to be busy with their own wars over here, and in time, of course, Angmar often fall, leaving Ered Luin to mop up the Misty Mountains from the west. So the western side is relatively safe. The Shadow of Mirkwood are kept at bay by the Elves of Mirkwood, so it's really just Rune. And my tip for you, if you really need one as playing as the Dwarves, is to try and take Rune down as early as you can. Force them into engagements early, try and take regions from them quickly, and get your front line set up. Certainly if you can capture Wintira Nior and take that as a base, that'll help you immensely. Do note, Dwarves do not get any boats other than the mercenary cog, and that's very, very rare. So you're not going to be shipping troops up and down the River Running that often, if at all. So do watch out for that. You'll need to rely on mercenaries, and they are few and far between. Speaking of mercenaries, there are quite a few mercenaries in Ravanion, so you can always supplement your army with some humans if you do indeed feel the need. Do also note that the Dwarves from version 2 have had some new portraits plastered through their roster in terms of generals and in terms of agents. So Ruren, a diplomat there, has a new portrait. And there are various other portraits littered throughout their nation now, so it's a bit more variety to the Erebor army roster indirectly through their generals. Also, version 2 features a significant ancillary expansion, so there are quite a few more ancillaries now that the Dwarves can get hold of, which adds to their gameplay a little bit as well. So that's all for the campaign map. Let's move on to their armies, the warriors of the Dwarves. Welcome then to the battle map side. So as we are doing full faction overviews, I will briefly show the stats of every unit, but I won't go into the same sort of detail I did way back in the first overviews. But I will at least show some of the stats, and talk out anything particularly important. First things first, having a look at the overview of the Dwarven army, you will note two very important things. Number one, you have absolutely no cavalry. The only cavalry you can get are mercenaries, and they either come out of your town hall in Erebor, or they are literal mercenaries that you train through the mercenary tab. That's the only way to get cavalry. And the Dale cavalry you can use from the town hall in Erebor is very rare, so you don't get much cavalry. Your cavalry are, of course, catapults, as we shall cover in a moment. The second thing to notice is the massive favour of the barracks event as opposed to the pre-barracks event. Most of your army comes in the late game. In the early game, you have few to little options. And lastly, of course, to note, you are not an archer-heavy nation. For those of you new to the faction overviews, the middle is all of your infantry, the left-hand side is all of your archers, and the right-hand side is all of your cavalry. The unit at the back is always your bodyguard, no matter how good or bad it is in comparison to the rest of your roster. And the lines are always everything you can get before the barracks event, then anything you can get before the barracks event that's slightly better. So it's normally militia tier, mainstream pre, mainstream post, and elites. And if there's any uber elites, they take a second category. Now, because the Dwarves are so strong at almost each category, their militia and their mainstream pre kind of merge as one, and their ubers are their elites. Their elites are so good, they're all basically uber. They're such a strong, heavy infantry nation. But starting us off early at the beginning with the man who's always the captain, and the reason why all of these battles to generals die, as you'll see in a moment, are of course the Dwarven Labourers. Now do note as well, I don't have enough room to show you the upgrades for most of the units, but the unit cards do represent what they look like when they are upgraded. This is almost more important with Erebor than anyone else. When you upgrade some of these units, they will take on the look that they have in the Hobbit films. You simply have to upgrade them. In the campaign map, that means building a barracks, getting it to the right tier for the unit level. It will tell you what level it needs to upgrade. It will say something like Dwarven Chainmail, and then you can click through your barracks, through your blacksmiths, and one of them will say provides Dwarven Chainmail. Once you've built that one, the unit can then upgrade, and it will then get the look that it has in the Hobbit films. In custom battle, it's as simple as upgrading the armor in the when you're in the army tab. But there wasn't enough room to fit them in the army and show them here, I am afraid. So, anyway, Dwarven Labourers. These are your starting militia, and they are noteworthy because they are effective against armour. They're one of the only militia units that are effective against armour, and it gives them a little bit of a boost, given that their attack otherwise is only 4 and their total defence is 11, which is fairly average. However, for Dwarves, that's actually pretty cracking, and one thing that the Dwarves all have in abundance is morale. Dwarves are one of the hardest armies to rout on the battlefield. They will rout, don't get me wrong, but it's damned hard to make them do it. Their morale is always very good, minimum of good. This is their militia unit, and their morale response starts at average, whereas most start at poor or even lower than that for the orcs, and morale often starts at poor in militia tier. So those are your labourers. Your first real mainstream unit, of course, though, are the Erebor Infantry. They used to be called Dwarven Warriors. They are now called Erebor Infantry. That's what they upgrade to look like. They have a 7 attack, which is obviously better than the militia by 3, and their defense is 14, so they're boosted over the militia. They also have a charge bonus of 3, which is slightly better. Their cost, however, will be slightly more, and that is all on the campaign map. I don't go through the costs in these overviews because that would just make them ridiculously long. I instead just give you a general idea of what this nation's costs are like, and the Dwarves are an expensive faction, much like elves. So your troops will cost a lot. However, this is just your second unit, the Erebor Infantry, and they already have very good morale. So as I say, your morale is not going anywhere in any time soon. They can make a shield wall, but they're not effective against armour. Another unit that you get in the early doors are the Iron Hills Mattox, who now have their upgraded look from the get-go. They are a flanking unit, or what we like to call strike infantry, or shock infantry, any of the above. And basically they are the closest thing to a cavalry unit that you can get on foot. They're very good at attacking. Their charge bonus is only 3, but their attack is 10. They have a two-handed weapon and they're effective against armor. This all gives them a boost in the flank attack. However, like all dwarves, they are very slow. Dwarves are the slowest runners in the game. Their units all have a negative running effect, which means that even their strike infantry will take some time to get to the enemy lines. Right, then we come to the Stonefoot Warriors. Now, do note that the Stonefoot Warriors are from the Oricon clan hall, so they are an AOR unit, which means area of recruitment. They are restricted by region, but they are in this earlier tier, as you can see. Their total defense, not too far off the Erebor Infantry at 16. Their attack is lower because they are a spear unit, but that gives them a significant boost against mounts. So they are obviously skilled against mounts, but they gain, being spear units, they are decidedly good against mounts, but they are not as good against infantry. So holding the line against infantry, Erebor Infantry would be better, but holding the line against cavalry, Stonefoot Warriors are better. Now, don't get me wrong, they're not going to get massacred by infantry because they are dwarves, but they will still suffer slightly against infantry in a way that they won't against cavalry. They can also make a shield wall. And again, something that all dwarves have is excellent stamina. Dwarves can just fight on. In morale, in fitness, in anger and aggression, they will just keep on at it. Oh, apparently their recruitment cost varies. That's interesting. I've never seen that before. Anywho, so the recruitment cost, I should actually note at the bottom, is accurate. It is an accurate reflection of how much they cost in the campaign, because I've made all of those recruitment costs for the custom battle the same as the campaign map. So whilst I won't really talk about the recruitment cost, every now and then I might mention it, but that is actually their cost in the campaign as well. Obviously that one unfortunately varies. I don't know why it says that, but as you'll note, there's various costs and they get more expensive as we go through, but some of them vary and others don't. I don't know why. Oh, it's because they're a mercenary unit, that's why. They can be trained as mercenaries, so it doesn't reflect there. So any mercenary unit it won't say, but it's around the same as the others, so that's sort of 600 mark. Right, so that's your first tier militia. Your first tier in archers, and available everywhere, are of course the Erebor axe throwers. These are effective against armour as they hurl axes at everyone. And outside of being axe throwers, they are kind of a cross between the infantry and the labourers. So the axe throwers have the defence and the melee attack of the labourers. Excuse me, sorry, but with that extra missile attack gives them a huge boost. But their morale and their morale response are reflective of the infantry rather than the militia. Their morale response is impetuous, which means they will not only take morale shocks very well, but they also have a tendency to attack without being told to if you don't put them in the defensive stance. Their armour class is only average, that's just general information, and with all dwarves you get a bonus in the snow and you get a negative effect in the deserts, but you are unaffected if you are fighting in forests or on grassland. Unfortunately, we try to match the hidden stats up with how the map actually looks, so an area that's predominantly trees you would hope would be forest, but it's not always the case, and so sometimes you might think you're going to get a bonus and you don't. But do note that snow does not necessarily mean mountains, and it actually means snow, which means the dwarves get a bonus in winter and then fight normally in all the other seasons. But because obviously the snow covers almost the entire map in winter, it means that in winter you get a huge bonus to your fighting capabilities that other nations do not get. Now you also get in this militia tier the Stiff Beard Scouts. Again, these come from the Oricon clan hall. And they sound very dwarven, as you might expect. And they are actual archers, the only archer unit that Erebor gets in version 2. They are reliable in snow, as all the others are. Excellent stamina, as all the others. Your missile attack is pretty poor. Your morale's pretty poor. Your melee after that, though, again, is at labourer level. They are very much like a militia archer unit. They just happen to only be available from the Oricon clan hall. And that's what they look like, as you can see there. So that's your militia tier. But your militia tier is supplemented, or this is more like your mainline pre-tier because you're dwarves. But you are, of course, supplemented with the catapult. And there you can see, if you're fond of the Battle of Middle-earth games, you will like an awful lot of the Dwarven lines now, because they're all taken from it. Now, the Dwarven catapult is unique in many ways. Number one, it is more readily available than anyone else's catapults. Well, actually, that's not true. It is actually quite rare to train, but it's cheaper than all the other factions' catapults. And it has the ability to not only shoot a mortar shot, which makes it very effective over walls, but it can also shoot Grapeshot, which makes it very effective against infantry. It is the best catapult in the game by an absolute mile. It's even better than the trebuchets of Gondor. Whilst the trebuchets may have an excellent siege ability, this thing is a slayer of humans. Man, beast, humanoids in general. It is ferocious, and because of that, but because you don't get cavalry, the catapult makes up for it with your dwarven engineering. And also, courtesy of Leo's mod from way back, of course, you get unique catapults as the dwarves, which look pretty cool, so you can really stand out. So then we come to your first tier after the barracks event. Tier, this listed here as number 3, and the 3 that you can get everywhere are King's Halberds, King's Spears, and King's Axes. Reflecting the fact, of course, that the last king, if you will, of the dwarves in Middle-earth, not including the Oricon, is in Erebor, so their units take the name of King. King's Axes are shock infantry, effective against armour with a high attack and a high charge for dwarves. Their total defence at 20 in the later stages, but they cost 1,000 gold. Morale is excellent, morale response is very good. They get a bonus against any beast, so that's not just Oliphants, but that's also the great beasts of Mordor and, believe it or not, chariots. So they're slayers of machine and beast. They are supported by the King's Spears, who unfortunately replaced the old Erebor Pike unit, which no longer exists in version 2, and instead you get a spear unit, an elite middle tier spear. The Pikes have all gone to Khazad-dûm. So this is just a generic kind of middle tier pike unit, spear unit. Solid defense, reasonable attack, which they're always lower on spearmen. Excellent morale, good morale response, and a bonus against all kinds of cavalry, as you'd expect. They're slightly cheaper than the axes at 995. And then finally, your other mainstream unit at this tier, and arguably which is your pike unit. Halberds are like pikes, but they are slightly worse. They're easier to be attacked and flanked. They don't have the same OP animation that pikes have. The halberd animation is only partly OP. So you get the King's Halberds. Their attack is very low to reflect the fact that even though the halberd's not as good as the pike, it is still very OP. And their defense is lower as well, again, because of that fact. So their defense is slightly lower. They can form a spear wall, and they are effective against armor, which helps boost their attack as well. So even though they are a later tier unit, don't be put off by the fact their attack is only 3. I'll explain that this one video, but probably never again. The Pike animation in Medieval 2 is really overpowered in that it keeps the enemy back. They don't get an opportunity to attack back. The halberds share this animation to a point, but they don't have it as much. So a Pike unit will always have a very low attack stat for its tier, but rest assured they are incredibly powerful. And a Pike unit that is completely protected on its flanks will massacre almost anything. They are so powerful in Medieval 2, which is why there are so few of them in the game. So that's your other mainstream post-barracks event unit, the King's Halberds. Now, supporting you from the Oricon are the Iron Fist Axes, which are, again, another shock tier unit, similar, of course, to the King's Axes. But they are slightly better. 1 more on the charge bonus, 1 more on the attack, but slightly less defense paying for it. But otherwise, they're basically identical units. But the Oricon just gives flavor to the Erebor campaign. And the Iron Fist Axes are just slightly more aggressive than their King counterparts. But otherwise, they are basically identical units with just different visuals. Do note that the Iron Fist or the Oricon units do not get visual upgrades. Whereas the King's units, as you can see, will all go from this kind of ragtag Dwarven mail. And they boost up to these Dwarven plate, which is currently on display with the Mattox of the Iron Hills over there. Or what they called Iron Hills Mattox, yes. But at this post here as well, you get 2 ranged units. One trains everywhere, and one that is one of your best units, absolutely beasts, but only available from the Oricon Clan Hall. So the first, of course, are the King's Crossbows, supporting this middle tier. Effective against armor as all crossbows are, missile attack of 10. The defense and their melee attack after that is reminiscent of the kind of tier that they're at. They are pretty damned good when they're not firing their crossbows as well. They are solid infantry that back up their ability with the crossbow. Now, do note that in Medieval 2, if you're a newcomer to it, crossbows are very good, but if they don't have a clear line of sight, their arcing shot, i.e. the shot that they fire high into the sky to arc over your troops and then drop down on the enemy, is awful. Crossbows are not very good at arcing shots. Their shots kill almost no one, and for some reason it just totally negates their damage. So if you can have a clear line of sight, they are the best thing you'll get to gunmen in this game, but without it, they are relatively weak. But they are pretty good infantry to make up for it, so do bear that in mind. Supporting them are, of course, my favourite unit for Erebor, I have to say, are the Blacklock Engineers. They are a much better version of crossbows. So, the Blacklock Engineers' missile attack is 11, their total defense is 23, but they're much worse in warfare. However, they are Erebor's token stake units. They are the unit that you can train that can place stakes. Of course, in version 2, stakes are incredibly rare. We basically removed them from the game because they were a feature that only a human player could use. So we took them away from as many places as we can, and only a few units now get them, and Blacklock Engineers are one. But of course they are effective against armor, excellent stamina, excellent morale, good morale response. Their armor class is heavier, as you can see with 15. Do note that the dwarves are very susceptible to armor-piercing enemies because most of their defense comes in their armor stat, which is entirely affected by armor-piercing. So the biggest threat to the dwarves is Isengard. If you make your way all the way to Isengard and you come across their armies, do watch out because Isengard has a very high proportion of armor-piercing units in its roster. And armor-piercing units are your worst nightmare. After, of course, the absolute PTSD-inducing skirmishing javelin throwers. If you've never played as the dwarves, then when you come across your first javelin throwing enemy, you will want to punch the screen, I assure you. Unfortunately, javelin throwers tend to be very fast units by their nature, and dwarven units by their nature tend to be very slow. And unfortunately, you just simply can't catch them, and they skirmish you around the map, and it does your nut in. And you have to come up with very clever ways to trap their skirmishers. Anywho, coming on then to your elite/uber tier, your actual elites are the Iron Guard. They are the only unit of this tier that is available everywhere. Everyone else is restricted by a certain region, so let's break them up a little there. So the Iron Guard are your actual elites. They start off looking as they did in 3rd Age Total War vanilla, but they upgrade to look, as you can see there in the image. Their attack is 12, which is pretty good for a sword unit. I mean, that's pretty damned good for a sword unit. That's normally what you'd see of a two-handed shock infantry. Their total defense is 32. That is one of the highest defenses in the game, bar none. Excellent stamina, shield wall, and with most of the, as we'll see as we go through these elites, a lot of Dwarven elites have unwavering morale, and it is locked. So not only does it take them ages to actually get to the point where they suffer negative effects because their morale is so low, they also just physically cannot run away unless you tell them to. So to explain that a bit further, a locked unit can effectively break, so it will get to the point where it suffers real negative fighting debuffs. It will suffer fighting debuffs because its morale is effectively broken, but it simply cannot break. So they just won't run away. They will fight on. But they can get to a point where they do fight worse, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. They cost 1,260 for the pleasure, though, which is fairly expensive. Supporting them throughout all of these, we'll start with the Axe Guard of Erebor. Khazad I Manu! Oh, now they've said the whole thing. Axes of the Dwarves are upon you. The Axe Guard of Erebor are very effective shock infantry. 10 attack, 8 charge bonus, effective against armor, excellent stamina, powerful charge, lock morale, excellent morale, and impetuous. Their total defense is 26, and again, that's entirely made up of defense skill and armor, so they're very susceptible to arrow fire, and they will absolutely get mown down by anyone that can shoot arrows that are armor piercing, which is Dunedain and any unit with crossbows. So do watch out for that. They cost 1,275 and they only come from Erebor. You must have Erebor to recruit them. Going along the line, we have the Oricon nobles. And they come with a very Scottish accent, reminding you that they are here. Oricon nobles are again a shock infantry, very similar to the Axe Guard of Erebor. Their attack is 11, their defense is 2 higher, but their charge is significantly worse. They are effective against armor, however, and again, unwavering morale and locked. So these two units are very similar, but the Oricon are a little better at holding the line because they have a higher defense. But their charge is a little worse to pay for that. Next up, the Dragon Slayers of Arid. Dragon Slayers are one of your absolute best units that you can train. Their attack is at 14, their charge is 5, reflective of the fact that they're not shock infantry. Their total defense is 33, and they inspire nearby troops. They can make themselves into a shield wall, and they frighten nearby enemy infantry. So they are very, very effective to have in your army, not only for your troops, but for the enemy troops as well. They will make your units fight better, and they'll make your enemies fight worse, which is excellent. And they can make a shield wall, which is also very, very nice. They require the Grey Mountains, though, which is, of course, Dane's Halls and Onazanar. But Onazanar starts as a village, and it will take a long time before you can train them there. But with a 33 defense and a 14 attack, they are one of your absolute, all-round, indisputable best units. They are beasts, which is why they're no longer a unique bodyguard. But they are defended by what is one of the game's best units, full stop, bar none. The Sons of the Fallen. So, Erebor have the honour of hosting one of the game's finest units. Now, the Dragon Slayers, I should say, 1,300, quite expensive for the pleasure. Sons of the Fallen are a mercenary unit, so they are actually available out in the wild. You can train them from the mercenary roster, and you will note that some humans can train them as well. They already have the armor that most of your units will upgrade to, but they do use a different shield. And of course, no one else gets the cool Roman-styled helmets, Centurion-styled helmets. They can make a shield wall. They're frightened nearby enemy infantry, but they don't improve your unit's fighting effectiveness. Excellent stamina, unwavering morale, lock morale, bonus against man and beast, or against beast and mount, and a 32 total defense, 5 shield, defense skill, armor, an attack of 11, which is really good for a spear unit. They are so good at holding the line. And if they get completely surrounded, you will often find times where they literally they burn from the middle out, like burning a hole in paper. They just carve through the enemies even when surrounded. They are beasts. And they cost a lot for the pleasure, unfortunately. And it doesn't show the upkeep costs here, and that's where they really hit you in the pocket. High upkeep. We're ready here. Finally, the Hammers of Gundabad. As the name suggests, they only come from Gundabad. They have unwavering and locked morale. Good morale response, very heavy. They get a bonus against beasts and chariots. And they can use sharpened stakes, one of the few units that can in your army other than the Blacklock Engineers. They are the only two that actually can. And they're one of the few melee units that can place stakes, which is cool, and I like that. They're effective against armor, which is a trait most Dwarven units have. You're a very anti-armor nation, which is another reason why you're so damned good. And their defense is 28, supplemented with armor and defense skill, and their attack of 10. They are shock infantry again, but slightly more defensive. You will note that the Dwarves, by not only having the best heavy infantry in the game, in comparatively, they also have outrageously good shock infantry. And the reason I say comparatively is because, yes, the Elves of Linden and Imladris are actually the game's best units in terms of stats, but they are significantly rarer. They are much harder to train, they cost more, they take longer to train, often 3 or 4 turns, and once you've trained them it can often be up to 40 or 50 turns before you can get a unit again, whereas the Dwarves are more like 20 to 30 turns before you get a unit again. So the Dwarves can have slightly more numbers, which makes their heavy infantry better. And this is a warning I shall try and remember in every video, do not judge the factions by the custom battle alone. We have not balanced the game for custom battle, we have balanced it for campaigns. Therefore, taking into account cost, recruitment time, recruitment availability, building availability, all of those things are factored in. So do not judge them by the custom map. Yes, one-on-one, Linden and Imladris' Mithlon Nobles or Eregian Smiths will smash any other unit. But how easy are those to train in the campaign map, I ask you? Exactly. Right, so finally, rounding us out are, of course, the Bodyguard. Royal Guard.
You'll be safe in my company.
Who have the voice of the Custom General from Battle of Middle-earth 2, The Rise of the Witch King.
Stand strong, my bearded friends.
Stand strong, my bearded friends. I say that one to myself so much in real life. It's a bit sad, really. Anyway, they are your Bodyguard. They get a 12 attack, which is pretty good. Same as the Iron Guard, your elite sword unit that's available everywhere. They have a 32 defense. In fact, they basically are Iron Guard, as you can see there. But they have a slightly better... they have one higher on their... they have one higher on their defense and one less on their shield than the Iron Guard do. They cost 1,000, and they are recruitable from your town halls. And you will then get a general if you train this unit. The 1,000 cost is the same for every Bodyguard of every nation, though. Their upkeep, unfortunately, I can't show you, but it's reasonably expensive. They have unwavering morale, of course. They have locked morale, and they have good morale response. Now, the downside to having locked morale on a general means that if a battle goes ill, and you have run out of movement points, so if your army is attacked and you retreat, and you're attacked again, you have to fight that battle, and not only that, but you can't order your army to retreat. Normally, this means you can at least fight on, and your general will eventually break, and he'll retreat on his own, and so you might save your general even if you lose the battle. But unfortunately, because your general is locked, if you get into a battle where you cannot retreat manually, your general is going to die, and that is just the way about it. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword if you have a Royal Guard, a locked morale for a Bodyguard unit. So, excuse me, sorry. I haven't spoken all day, and then I've talked for an hour straight. I had a massive coughing fit a moment ago, but hopefully, if everything's gone to plan, I cut that out. So, let's look at the Dwarves in action then, shall we? Well, let's try and look at the Catapult in action first, and then we'll follow up. I'll just put everyone in a line, as I always do, and get them all to fight as best they can. We are up against an army from the nation of Rune, because they don't have too many enemies, so we'll put them up in this battle. So, as always, these will end with us having a little fight against an enemy here, which is Rune. And the music kicks in, and the catapults start to wind. The enemy standing golden across the field. Are we on mortar or are we on grape? I can't remember. Oh, we're on mortar, and away they go. And silence reigns on the battlefield. Black smoke trails, and down they come, shattering the runic line. The mortar shot is incredibly powerful. Unbelievably powerful. But we're not here to just see the mortar. Let's see the grape shot as well. Swap to grape. Oh, we've just flown through some grape shot there, haven't we? Enemy catapults fire back. Now, I note, obviously, that is a little broken and buggy and glitchy, but I'm fairly certain that's only because of something I've done to my own personal game. That shouldn't be in version 2. Anyway, here we come. Grapeshot getting ready. The first catapult stands prepared. Fire, men, fire! Grapeshot is an outrageously powerful ability. It slaughters infantry, as you are about to see, whenever they finally trigger it. Turn and shoot them then, if you're not going to do anything. Here we go. And here we go. And off it goes. There goes the Grapeshot. Flecking into the ranks. Flecking isn't a word, I've just made it up. That one, as you can see, it just hits all over the place. And it does a lot more damage than you might first think. And here we go again. Second wave of Grape. Coming up. And there it comes. Again, flicking across the enemy lines. Unfortunately, they're a little too close for the Grapeshot to have full effect. But if you can hit a squad square in the face, it will do a lot of damage. And the Dwarven line gets closer. The flames fire overhead. But the Dwarven line stands... I just said Dwarven line gets closer, didn't I? But the Runic line... Hello, welcome to the end then. So unfortunately it crashed, and that's because, again, that's nothing to do with the Dwarves. It won't crash in your game. It's purely because I have not set up the axe throwers to work properly in my own personal build, because I edited a certain file a while ago and I didn't edit it back in anticipation, which is foolhardy and foolish and my own fault. But I will now try and end all of these videos with at least just a little view of the screen, so you can get a look at where everyone else starts and have a little look at the information here. But that is the Erebor overview. I don't know who's going to be next, and I probably will take to the enemy army that now fights at the end of each... In fact, Rune are going to be next, because I am going to follow that pattern. So the army that you see at the end of each episode is going to be who we do in the next faction overview. So Rune are going to kick us off as the next faction overview. Who knows when it will be. I'll try and do at least one a week. In fact, I want to do and will do one a week. But what I mean is I don't know what day of the week yet I've settled on as being the day I record these, because they take a little bit longer than normal. And there's your unique picture of Dane in the middle there. I just rest assured that you will not crash the game when you play as the Dwarves. That axe thrower fix is my own fault, and I should have looked into that beforehand. But it wouldn't be a Arachir Garladirthan video without me getting something wrong. Do also note, I didn't mention it and I will do in future episodes, that the break down the middle of the army when I was showing you the Dwarven units, the large gap in between denotes that the second, the larger pool of units that were behind, they're only available after the barracks event, which kicks in around the 60th turn. But for now, that is everything. I hope you've enjoyed watching this Erebor overview. I hope you look forward to the overview of all the nations. As you can see, they're waiting for you. But until we speak again, dear friends, Navair Naden Pedimad Melonin, and farewell.